morning, good evening, and good afternoon to you all. From those down the road to the folks around the world. Welcome back to another summer series video. Now today is July the 23rd, the beginning of the Olympic Games in Tokyo, Japan. But this isn't the first time that Tokyo has held the Olympic Games. Back in 1964, having come from the dark days of the Second World War and the dismantling of the Japanese Empire, the Tokyo Games in 1964 were a beacon of how far the Japanese people had come and how much they had recovered again from those dark days of the 1940s. The Olympics is often held in the months of July and August, which is why this year National Health and Sports Day in Japan is being celebrated on the 23rd of July. But in 1964, the Olympics were held in the month of October. That's because the Olympic Committee at the time decided that holding an Olympic Games during Japan's rainy season, which is July and August, was probably not a good idea, and the humidity and heat of that season as well would also cause the athletes to suffer more than normal, perhaps. So they held them in October. So every year on the second Monday of October, Japan has a national holiday, which they dub the Health and Sports Day. This is both to celebrate the joyous occasion of the 1964 Olympics, but also a drive and a passion-driven national holiday filled with sports and health and generally about good well-being. Schools and businesses across Japan will hold their own mini sports days, their own mini Olympics. Now, unlike your sports days at the local primary school where you'd stand there with your ill-fitting PE kit running along the track with an egg and spoon in hand and maybe even a parents' race, the Japanese tend to do more traditional sports on this national holiday. They do the 100-meter relay, or perhaps even go as far as the high jump. Or I've even heard of something called a cavalry battle, where you sit on somebody's shoulders and try and knock off the opponent of somebody also in a piggyback sort of position. But let's face it, this Olympics in Tokyo is facing a lot more controversy, criticism, and cold hard truths than many other Olympics before it. According to a government audit in Japan, the Games are set to cost $1 billion. The budget was just $7.5 billion. You've of course got the cost of delaying the Games, which was roughly $3 billion. Then making everything COVID secure, which was roughly $2 billion. And then of course the insurance policies that had to be taken out, which is pretty standard for an Olympic Games, but of course this being a little bit different, costing roughly $1 to $3 billion in total. When it comes to the Olympic Village, the cost of it has been astronomical. Some $29 million has been spent to create shopping centres and state-of-the-art facilities for these athletes, but of course they can't use them. The big expensive food halls that were being built or have been built for people to all mix and have dinner together are going to set to be unused as athletes are being told to stagger their meal times and basically keep within their bubbles. Did you know that the style of the village is very Japanese minimalist in its aesthetic? And the National Stadium, as well as the accommodation blocks and other facilities at the village, are being made from up to 40,000 timber frames from 63 different regions. And that once the Games come to a conclusion, these 40,000 timbers will be given back to these respective areas and prefectures to be used in their own ways and to create more facilities for the local populations, which I think is actually quite a nice little sentiment. So the way in which most Olympic Games and most governments make their money back putting on these games is through the influx of foreign and domestic tourists into Tokyo, into the country itself, into Japan. Now, last month in mid-June 2021, foreign spectators were banned from entering the country to watch the Olympic Games. This is just another layer and another level of the already existing regulation banning international travel into Japan, which affects some 163 countries in total, and only in exceptional circumstances can you actually be allowed into the country of Japan. Now, to put that into economic circumstances, the International Olympic Committee is set to lose $3 to $4 billion because of this lack of revenue, because of this lack of tourist spending in Tokyo and Japan. The least risky way in which scientists decided to hold the Olympic Games was to have half-capacity stadiums with roughly 10,000 spectators, all of which are from Tokyo or the domestic regions, and to obviously have it COVID safe. But last week, mid-July 2021, the announcement came from Prime Minister Suga that all domestic tourists and all domestic spectators were going to be banned as well, effectively creating a very empty stadium and maybe putting a little bit of anxiety into the Olympic athletes themselves. But that's not the big issue. The economic side of things is always a bone of contention, whether that be in Tokyo or Rio, London or Beijing, wherever. The big point, the big issue is of course this virus crisis that we are going through right now. On paper, Japan has fared very well compared to other countries or other Western countries such as the US, the UK, Mexico, Brazil. All of these big countries have had millions of cases and sadly hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives. In Japan, 800,000 people have recorded cases. And sadly, 15,000 people have lost their lives. The practice of bowing instead of shaking people's hands and the wearing of face masks, which was already common practice in many parts of the Asiatic continent, created that extra barrier or that initial barrier to stop the spread of cases in those initial phases of this crisis. But that's not really the point that I'm trying to make, although it may look on paper to be better than some of the more bigger countries and in some cases smaller countries. The Japanese people fear that with 11,000 athletes descending on Tokyo, on the Olympic Village, and thousands more in officials, referees, judges, organising members, it's going to create a super spreader event. They're going to bring COVID with them and they're going to spread it to the wider population. Remember that Japan has a rather elderly population and that the majority of the population, some 93%, are all condensed into megacities like Tokyo and Osaka. Now, as the athletes have slowly descended on Japan and on Tokyo in dribs and drabs and filtered through, we've had a small number of virus positive cases. Last month, it began with 2 Ugandan athletes coming into Japan and just 2 days later testing positive. And in the past week, with only 5 days to go until the Games, 3 South African athletes also tested positive. Now, on the one hand, it proves that this system by the Japanese government and the Olympic Committee to making the Games safe and secure is working. The daily testing and the isolated bubbles of the Olympic athletes is working. But on the other hand, it also says that this virus crisis is still here and there are still risks to this Olympic Games. And that super spreader event is still a possibility. Now, some of the biggest stars in the world of tennis have even spoken out about the safety concerns to do with the Olympic Games and have actually decided to pull out of their respective teams' participation in Tokyo Games because of these safety reasons. What is more, the entire North Korean team has decided that they are also not going to participate in this year's Olympic Games for the very same reason, the fear of COVID safety. And of course, North Korea hasn't recorded officially any cases. Now, the other added issue is, of course, the vaccine and the vaccination program. When the Pfizer vaccine was issued in February, those first initial weeks and months were very slow in uptake. And although it has since picked up over the last couple of months, only a third of the Japanese population has been given a single dose, and only a fifth have been double dosed. So on paper, comparing it to the likes of the UK, the US, Israel, the Japanese system of vaccination program is faring worse. It has been assured by the Japanese government, the Olympic Committee, and the spokespeoples of individual countries' sports teams that 80% of all of the athletes arriving in Tokyo and in Japan will be vaccinated. So let's talk about the other aspects in which the Games have been affected by this virus crisis. One aspect is the Olympic relay. Whole areas have had to have been abandoned due to safety concerns, due to states of emergency, because this relay started all the way back in March. And in an announcement, all public roads are set to be banned from being used by these relay runners because of the fears of large gatherings. 10,000 volunteers that were set to help out at this year's Games have quit due to the safety concerns of this virus crisis and these large gatherings. Health workers and health officials who were asked to attend the Olympics to be the sort of first aid assistants were outraged when they were told to sort of prioritise the Games other than the virus crisis at hand. So this is a melting pot of issues, both economically and circumstantially. And it is why, over the past few months, some 450,000 people signed a petition to cancel the Olympic Games. And why the recent surveys that have been conducted every few weeks or so have slowly increased in percentages in the number of people either wanting to cancel or postpone the Games. Just last month, that figure stood at 70% of people wanting to cancel or postpone. Now it's at 83% of people. So why bother holding the Games at all? The budget is spiralling out of control. The virus crisis is still holding Japan in a fairly tight grip. Surveys and studies are suggesting that the majority of Japanese people don't want the Games. A lot of the facilities and the tourist basis of the Games is being severely cut. And Prime Minister Suga, who only came into office in September 2020, has seen his approval ratings halve over the last year. So again, why hold these Games? Well, there's a lot of political aspects and there's a lot of economic aspects. In terms of the economics, it's about a rebirth, a rejuvenation into the Japanese economy that has seen a pretty steady and gradual decline and stagnation since the beginning of the 21st century. That, added with the nuclear disaster and the tsunami at Fukushima in 2011, which created a lot of economic problems in itself, these Games were set to be a rebirth for Japan and again, a rejuvenation of that economic state. And it's very similar to the 1964 games, which was supposed to be, again, a rejuvenation of the Japanese culture and the Japanese government, having come from the dark days of the Second World War. The other aspect is the political side, which is the fact that next year, in 2022, Beijing in China is set to host the Olympic Winter Games. And of course, the organisation of 2 games in 1 year would be nigh on impossible. And because Japan is a great rival of China, they don't want to clash. It's like having a summer blockbuster matched with another summer blockbuster film in the same week. They want to keep them spaced apart so that they can each hold success and not outdo one another, even though they kind of are trying to outdo each other. And there we have it. That is the information that is out there and what has been done or said already about this situation in Japan. So without further ado, I'm going to finish up the video here, and I will leave you with a short origami ending. See you in the next video.